Good morning. So here's today's daily. We've made this hollow tree generator, and I'm just going to go through how I made it and just kind of what this graph is. So first, let's just play around with some of the variables I've exposed. So we have this radius, which is more of the root radius. So I can shrink it, grow it. It's a little hard to see just because it's kind of shifting around so much. So that's actually the inner radius. We have this outer radius here, which we can push even more. So we kind of create this like sprawling tree, which is pretty cool. And we can also adjust how many there are, or how complex the roots are, so they can get kind of simple, or we can keep giving them more avenues to kind of twist and turn. This is the vertical offset of those roots, so kind of where do they attach to the tree. We can kind of adjust that. Get them way too high. It's not really a bounds to that, but it looks pretty nice. And then this value here allows us to distort the tree itself, kind of give it like a gnarled look. You can also change the hole distribution, so there's a probability for how crunched it is. At some point you get floating elements. Could remove those, but lazy. I think just kind of finding a little mid-ground seems reasonable. Maybe just slightly below 0.5 seems to work pretty well. And then we can also change where those holes are distributed, so we can push them further down the tree and actually create like this kind of crumpled, crunchy mess. But personally, I prefer it right around there. Oh yeah, so that's just the overall kind of meta values. Let's get into the graph. And let's take a look at what we started with. So I think I said this with my last video. I've even said it in my notes for this daily, but I really need to stop making objects within the graph. Right now I made this cylinder primitive, and we made this kind of just, I'm going to use my wireframe so we can see what's going on. We made this very simple primitive shape to start with. And it's useful. There's nothing inherently wrong with doing it this way, but I do feel that it limits the complexity. If I had started with just a plane that I subdivided, I could manipulate that plane, move it around, and maybe like an empty for where the root or the stump should generate or something like that. Either way, leaning into, you have this procedural effect you're adding on top of your object, but keeping a manual bespoke object, something you can manually manipulate, seems to be the way I will be moving forward with a lot of these notes, because it just 10x's the amount of variation I could get. Anyway, so we start with this little shape. I wanted to have all the roots connect, so they're all starting from the same point. This would allow me, I could, for example, change the amount of options or avenues the roots could go down just by changing the cylinder size. Then in order to expand the roots, I have this extruding base. I created this little loop that repeats. It takes the outer edge, extrudes that outer edge, and for whatever amount I am offsetting it. So I have a distance that I'm taking from the edge of our original shape all the way out here. Let me, I guess, just draw on this. So I'll do the view. Yeah. So from here to here, right here to here is the extrusion, and that's this one distance right here, the value variable. And then however many times I'm slicing that extrusion, I divide the total distance by the number of slices, and that's how much each segment goes. Because that way I can change the amount of slices, but still have it end in the same spot. Yeah. Not going to get into too much here, but we'll touch on the set position. So that is, I believe, the root base here. We can see we can kind of adjust the shape. Pretty useful. Nothing too crazy there. Okay. we do give it some additional noise by using a noise texture. We have this vertical offset value, and we're scaling that value. I can even push it a little bit further if I wanted to. I probably should have included that in my exposed variables, but I'm not going to for right now. If you want to get in the graph and play around with the scale, you can. Gives you a lot of options for the kind of undulation of the roots. But this is the shape, so we can imagine that once we get to making the roots, first you need to start, in order to kind of create the path for the root, you have to choose a start and end point. So in order to do that, I have this value here, the edge select. You can see I'm selecting the outer ring, and then I'm using index 0 here, which is that center point that we were looking at earlier where they all connect. That's the start. So it starts at the 0 and it goes out to that outer edge. Right here, edge select. Then we use a noise texture, and this is the important part because this is what gives us our cost. If I slice this off, you can see now they're perfectly straight and just kind of odd. Like that's not how roots usually work. There might be some other useful uses of this, but I prefer to give it a lot of variation. And to do that, you can just use a noise texture in this edge cost node. So basically, every time it goes, okay, where can I go? It has a value of 0 or 10, and it wants to go down the lowest cost. So it'll go, okay, 0 is the next option versus 10 or whatever. And I'll go down there, and then does that same check again. Obviously, not doubling back onto the same vertex it was on. Yeah, and this is kind of the actual root shape. So we start with, before we put it in, we have this undulating cylinder shape. Then it goes through here, and for each path, we actually do separate that from the original mesh because I don't want the roots to be in the same spot. I'm trying to avoid intersection there. So every time we separate it using, of course, the separate node, and then we assign it saying, hey, we pathed this node. We've already been on this path. We don't have to go down that again. So it separates it, joins it back, but now it's no longer an option to explore for our edge path. And we do that 16 times. So that's how many times we're going through here. That again would probably be a great value to expose on my graph. Yeah, in fact, I'm going to do that now and probably re-upload it. Let's say input, say root amount. Okay. And there we go. I'm trying not to get too crazy with it, like making this a complete asset. Like this is not meant to be a product. We're really just trying to, I'm just trying to educate myself on how I can do these things. Yeah. Okay. So we got our paths, and then we bring all of those individual paths, we turn them into curves, and then we can just do a standard lofting a shape along a curve, do this curve to mesh node right here. Takes a little profile curve, and we just run that profile down the length, lofting it, creating these nice shapes. Now, one thing that we notice is that especially if we look at the top, you can see how geometric this is. Pretty cool. Honestly, think that looks really interesting, but it's not how roots work. Maybe cyber roots. So we subdivide it. Give it a little subdivision, round out those edges. Another thing you could do is just turn down the amount of like slices we did on the extrusion, so that way the subdivision will curve more. I'm gonna avoid that for now. Okay, next. Next, we actually set the normals on the mesh. So if I do it before, you can see this is the before. We can see kind of each little tube, and then the mesh normal here, we're sampling our stump in order to blend the roots into it. So let's, before we continue down this path, we're actually going to take a look at our stump, which is its own little set of boxes. And again, I made the fatal flaw of starting with a primitive here. I should not have done that. There's one benefit, which is that I actually am using a profile curve. So I go to the front view. So I have the curved circle here. This is like the stump base shape. And then we're using the curve to mesh node to create this profile. And it's just taking this curve here and then running it around the circle, making that shape. Very cool, very useful, but unfortunately, I still don't think that, like I could have just actually made that circle its own object, then I could play with it, manipulate it, and again, 10x that flexibility while keeping things disentangled. Anyway, but one thing we can do is we can adjust the shape of our stump however we want to do it. Very useful. Let me get rid of the viewer so we can see this kind of in real time. I can make it a lot more stumpy. I could even add another subdivision to kind of make it thinner. It's looking a little crunchy, taller, etc., etc. You get the picture. Undo that for now. Even just manipulating the starting 2 points would be very useful. Okay, so once we have that shape, it looks good. I'm going to punch some holes into it. So that's what I do. Actually, what do we do? Boom. Oh, I think I joined tried to join the base of it. That didn't quite work out very well, so it's there, but not super useful. And then we also set the position. So I wanted some nice undulation or distortion, and that's the classic noise texture. What we're doing is we're using the normals, so we're getting the direction from the face outward, and then we're offsetting that. If I mute the noise, you can see it's just kind of this generic offset, but by introducing some noise, we get the variation, which is super useful. Okay, and after that, we punch some holes. So how are we doing this? I really love using the factor because we used a curve. That's what this node is right here. Because we used a curve at the very start, we can actually capture the factor. So if I find my viewer node, let me plug this in, you can see that this gives us a nice range that we can play with and manipulate, and just very useful all around. And so initially we were just punching holes randomly, but by making this condition where we use the factor and the probability, see right here, map range, we can kind of constrain where we're punching holes to just the top. It's a little messy in here. I could probably make that a bit more elegant. We also extruded some of our edges. So we took the edges, we select from them randomly, and then we extruded them just in order to create some additional variation. Scale them down a little bit, and we get these kind of chunkiness. Because I wanted like, like bark like peels off. It's kind of what I was going for. Okay. Then we just slap some colors on there. We can't see the colors in the viewer, but they're there. And then that's where we get back to the normal transfer. So to set normals on our roots, what we do is we use the set mesh normal node set to free. We can also set it to like face corner or something, or usually you do want the normals set on face corners. I'll just keep it at what I had before. We are blurring the normals we're adding just so we got a nicer, it was getting a little crunchy. So, but using the sample nearest surface, we're getting the normal value of our stump. And then we're using proximity to create the fall off that it will exist in. I don't know if I can view that directly, but let's see. If I take the distance here, cool. And so we can see the distance where that effect from the stump is. And we can keep what we want to do inside that range, which is set the mesh normals. Okay, Lastly, we bring them together, bada boom. We set the material. We've actually been setting the colors throughout this whole process, but it's a little hard to visualize the graph. I'm just using vertex colors and one material because that's really simple, keeps it easy. I just take the color attribute, I'm storing it, all my color as color, plugging it in, and then most importantly, actually setting the material on. Because sometimes I sit there and I set the color and I'm changing it, like, oh, why am I not seeing it? You have to make sure you're applying the material you want to use. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And we're at the end of the graph. And that's my little overview for this project. I'm going to re-upload this version here just because I have some nice, added that additional parameter. Want to make sure y'all can use that. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you get some use out of it. Please, if you find some value out of this, I would appreciate some donations, or you can add some money to downloading it. But either way, thank you for checking this out. Hope you have a great one. See you tomorrow. Bye, fun. Bye.